I jumped in and went live before I was quite ready because this is kind of endemic of the approach I want to take with doing things is go before you're ready. And so I kind of trapped myself into this. Welcome back to the trial and error live stream. Fearless will probably be joining us here pretty shortly. Um, Couple of housekeeping things. I know I keep talking about it, but I'm actually building out the process to actually start distributing these clips, getting them out there back on the internet. I'd been doing it for a while, but it really was disorganized, and so I wanted to orient it a little bit and make it, something that went into my natural workflow. So um, I am still going through and pulling these larger live streams and breaking them down into things that we can actually use. And really trying to build the audience here because we got a great library right now, and we got a lot of material. And so we have our YouTube channel, Trial and Error live stream, or Trial and Error YouTube channel. Um, Go check us out. Give us the likes, give us the follows or whatnot, so we can grow this channel and continue to have our platform to get on here and talk our stuff. Um, I wanted to revisit I wanted to revisit a little bit about the story that America tells about itself, because we had a pretty good conversation a couple months ago regarding what happens when America stops believing the narrative it tells about itself. And I feel like this is an apropos time. Trying to fix my light. It feels like it's a good time to revisit this conversation, just because um, there's been some interesting developments in the national scene in terms of the American narrative and what this actually looks like for us moving forward. I've been talking to people down in Texas regarding their local, their state elections, whatnot. Um, Talking, following what's happening in Maine and things along those lines. And what you're starting to see are, specifically Black folks um, kind of divesting a little bit from the role of trying to be, from an electoral um, standpoint, trying to be the more or less trying to be the conscience of everybody else, of the nation, essentially, in terms of who they elect and who they put their votes behind or whatnot. And it sparked some really, really interesting conversations. And so I wanted to have that conversation about what happens when the American narrative kind of collapses. Okay. And so the prevailing um, theme for this, and I'm actually putting the banner in the, putting the banner to scroll, is um, what happens when America no longer believes the story it tells about itself. And we got to have that conversation, um, just because um, I think a lot of the way that we process and frame and conceptualize our history in this country is filtered through a specific narrative about this country. And a lot of times that narrative truly depends on where you exist in this country. Um, you know, in some households, in some places, we're always the good guys. In some households, um, we're kind of the anti-hero. In other places, we're the villain. And so I think it's interesting to have these conversations to really frame it and disconnect it from this blinding, the blinding, all-in nature of patriotism and jingoism. Because I'm talking narrowly about where the ultra nationalism kind of thing, where we can never have any kind of critique against this country in any way, shape, or form. I don't understand. I don't know people that live their lives like that, where they they never critique anything. They like everything they experience, and so they never give voice to things that they don't like. I don't know how you exist like that, where there's no concept of, well, this isn't what my expectations are, and this could be better. That feels like a pretty hollow life. And so I wanted to kind of touch base on that. Well, Fearless is getting in the room. Um, Last week we talked about a little bit about the cult of having things, and I think it kind of falls into the cult of having things. I feel like oftentimes when we're not having all these major crises events, some of us do fall into that optimization where is it called hedonic adaptation, if I'm not mistaken, where we optimize, we adjust our level of happiness. We always have like a baseline of happiness, and so no matter what you're facing, you always try to force yourself to return to that baseline level of happiness. And so uh, when we don't have all this other chaos going on in the world and things along those lines, people try to adjust back to their normal baseline of happiness. And I think it manifests even when this country is in struggle. That's kind of a human thing where you just kind of optimize and adjust to a relative level of happiness. Okay. So what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of outward demonstrations of strength. um, you know, and bravado and chest beating and we're always the most qualified, we're always the most competent, we're always the strongest, we're always exceptional. And I see it specifically on TikTok because you see a lot of Europeans that are experiencing America's stuff for the first time. And yeah, there's a level of where they are in awe of certain aspects of the American life. you know I've followed the TikTok where they're trying out different American food items and being blown away by Waffle House, having their minds blown by walking into a Walmart and things along those lines. And for a lot of Americans, that really gasses your head up, like, oh well, they don't have this stuff there, but it's like, but they have healthcare. um, you know, Understand that a lot of the Europeans that are walking around making the content about how mind blown they are about America, they're using their like, they got like 4 weeks of vacation. They got like months of vacation that is mandated that be given to them, and so they can go on these extended holidays and come and see things like the World Cup. They get paid enough where they have the money to travel here and be able to see things like the World Cup. And a lot of people I know um, are in a point where they can't even really go out of town. Like they can't travel to another state consistently. And without worrying about getting into PTO and things along those lines. And so we do have to keep a balance on that. Like I said, the TikTok wheel is great. You get a chance to see Australians reacting to squirrels for the first time and having their minds blown. British people walking in Walmart and being absolutely floored by how big Walmart is. The one I've seen is Bucky's. Really, really like, oh, Bucky's is amazing. Them trying all the different food items, the variety of fast food options and dining options that we have in this country. And it's kind of it's funny and it's interesting to watch, but also they're coming here with, you know, 4 weeks of vacation, 4 weeks of guaranteed vacation time, you know. So you balance it out. Um, so that's why I wanted to revisit this again. America projects itself as strong and free and competent and stable and exceptional, with a moral clarity and globally respected. And we're starting to see these things um, erode. And I mean, be honest with you, there's a lot of places where, outside of this country, that narrative hasn't existed ever. Like ever. These viewpoints that we have of the American narrative has never really existed in some places ever. In other places, we did have the shining city on the top of the hill kind of thing. Running for a while until people actually saw that, yeah, there's a lot of disconnection and inequity in this society. And I know that there's a lot of people that kind of walk around with this idea that this inequity is just a normal feature of daily life anywhere. And you're always going to have your winners and losers. And I don't know, because I think at some point you have to say, okay, so what are the winners having versus what are the losers? What are the winners having versus the people that lost at the capitalism game? What have they lost? And is this actually equitable? Is this actually fair? Is this morally right? Or are the winners because they managed to exploit something that the losers need or require to survive on. You know, there always is, the dystopian sci-fi where they're rationing off oxygen kind of thing. Um, and wouldn't, I wouldn't put it past somebody, because I mean, shoot, what's his name? Bezos got on the other day and was sitting there talking about, human beings' consumption of water is competing with AI. And he was saying this like this was this negative thing where um, it was this holistically negative thing that human beings' needs for water was just this really, really bad and awful thing. And it was limiting the use of AI. Ridiculousness kind of stuff where, um, you know, and at first people thought he was taking our context, and it's like, no, that was the context. Like, I mean, these people and their need to drink water is actually limiting what we could be doing with AI. Like that is a really dystopian and psychotic and disconnected way of viewing humanity. This resource that people need to survive, and in some places is not readily available or easily accessible. The problem is that the people are drinking the water, and we need them not to drink the water. We need them to drink less of the water so that our machines can exist, because that's kind of what it is. We need the people to stop drinking the water. And that's how Bezos kind of framed it. And that was the right pushback, that it was kind of the correct pushback that he got for how he phrased that, because that's a psychotic way of thinking, but it is what it is. And a while ago, that would have been uh, enough for people to say, okay, we need to reconsider our money and where we're putting our money, specifically with Jeff Bezos's business interest. But you can't really do that right now, and I'm gonna tell you why. You can't not pay Jeff Bezos. He's made the society so that you can't not pay him. Amazon Web Services controls a whole bunch of the internet. A lot of a lot of websites that you depend on for your daily existence are run through Amazon Web Services. Pretty much every video streaming service uses Amazon Web Services. You're going to pay Jeff Bezos whether you want to or not. If you have Netflix, your money is going to Jeff Bezos in some way, shape, or form, because Netflix has to pay for space and bandwidth to stream all of this stuff. It's also why I get into people where we talk about water usage and all this other stuff. We don't like the AI water usage, but apparently we're fine with the streaming content water usage of these data centers. And the data centers don't really care, bro. Like, they don't care what they're doing. But we're fine with one aspect of the wasteful side of it, but not with the other. But yeah, they've rigged this society where you're going to pay Jeff Bezos no matter what you do. Even if you are trying to actively avoid putting money in this pocket, you never ordered anything on Amazon. Oh, you got streaming service, you're paying him. Oh, the website where you order your baby's formula is hosted on Amazon Web Services. And part of the money that you give to that formula goes to maintain that website. Like, they've created a society where certain people have made it so that you can't avoid giving them money. And I feel like that should set off people's alarm bells. Like, I don't think people are concerned enough about the fact that certain people in this country have created this place where you can't avoid putting money in their pocket. Like, even if you have a high level of intent and say, I'm going to choose where my dollar goes and I don't want to support this economically, you can't avoid them. I said, you can't avoid Jeff. You're gonna pay Jeff Bezos whether you like it or not. And that's the game that's at hand right now. Without getting too far into the stock jargon, my thing is with the entire SpaceX thing, right? You're going to pay Elon whether you want to pay him or not, because if you got some kind of big cap, big cap ETF where you're buying, where your fund, your mutual fund or your electronically managed fund always buys the biggest companies in the world and includes them in your portfolio. You own some SpaceX. Whether you want to give that man money or not, you giving him money. And that is starting to become the way that billionaires kind of interact, was like where it's ubiquitous, where it's like, I remember watching back in the days, watching RoboCop, and the concept of the mega corporation OCP was played for satire. We've got like 4 or 5 different OCPs running right now, where it is this ubiquitous corporation where they control everything and there ain't nothing you can do about it. Even right now with Palantir, even if you don't want to support Peter Thiel and Palantir, you're doing it just by paying your local taxes, because by paying your local taxes, your local police force, if you're in a large enough city, they're probably using Palantir products for their surveillance projects and monitoring the city projects. You're paying them. You're paying Peter Thiel something. And so they created a society where you can no longer opt out and pick and choose where your dollar goes, because it's all getting funneled in. Um, if you got moral disagreements with Larry Ellison, the dude that runs Oracle, you're going to pay Oracle no matter what. Oracle is so ubiquitous, to the point where it's almost like signing this weird deal with some underworld being that you can't escape from. You can't get away from it, because Oracle builds databases, and that's what they've been doing for a long time. And if your business has a database system where you track names and people, there's probably a good chance that it is an Oracle system. The money is going to get paid to Oracle no matter what. And now Larry Ellison's son is the head of Paramount Pictures. And so they own all the TV networks and TikTok. Congratulations. There's no way to escape this. And I think this is all part of this thing where you're starting to see more people actively get radicalized against the American narrative, just because it feels inescapable. The idea that you should be able to vote with your dollar is gone by the wayside, because they're removing options. Smaller competitors get forced out. Fearless and I just talked about it not too long ago, where this concept of the capitalist free market society is letting the market decide. But really, it's not about competition anymore. It's about keeping people from even entering the market. That's the game. There's a reason why you don't see a whole bunch of upstart drug companies in terms of pharmaceuticals. There's not a lot of upstart fuel companies or cable providers or internet providers. You don't see a bunch of upstart ones that are upsetting the big boys, because the big boys have paid for their spot and they're not going to let anybody else enter the market and mess their money up. So let me shoot a message here real quick. Make sure that he's not on another one. Yeah, we're about 18 minutes in. So anyway, we have kind of reduced this. We've kind of shrunken the American consumer's ability. All right, let's see where we're at. First Sensible Live. I'm listening to. All right, thanks for tuning in. Thank you. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. And like I said, removing people's ability to dictate what their dollars support is kind of a collapse in this American narrative of the markets determine everything and freedom. Okay. People are looking around and saying, does this story match what we're experiencing? And for some people that are doing really, really well and have a lot, yeah, shoot, it's great. If you're not wanting for anything or needing anything, your medical bills aren't devouring all of your money. Your grocery bill isn't doubling and tripling every couple of months, and you're fine with it, or it doesn't hurt you. Yeah, it's great. Everything seems on the up and up. But what's happening is more and more people are getting caught in that squeeze. And so what used to be firmly middle class, you know, firmly working middle class, that doesn't exist anymore. And these levels are kind of getting compacted right now. And so a lot of people who would have been super thrilled about the direction of the country years ago, just because of out of material comfort, are now looking around and questioning what's happening and where's my money going. Okay. And does this match what I grew up with? It's not just about politics, it's about what people actually believe regarding this country. Now, some of us haven't always had the ability to have blinders on regarding what this country is and what it represents. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I love the fact, this is what the goal is. We want to reach more people. Fearless should be joining us here shortly. But yeah, this is I appreciate the sub. Thank you. So again, it's not about belief. It's not about or it's not about politics. It's really about belief. A country runs on systems, but it also runs on a shared story that some people choose to believe, some people don't have an option to believe, and some people, they live a reality that they know that this thing is out of sync with what they actually see on television. So what the American narrative used to be, the story was never really fully true for anybody. But the story said if you work hard, you can move up. The government may be imperfect, but the system works. Like, these are the things that we tell people. Justice is served. If you do right by people, you're going to get paid your reward. And as long as you just go in and put in those 45 to 60 hours a week every week at your job, you're going to eventually move up through the system. And I found that out pretty quickly. That wasn't exactly the case. I saw really quickly that oftentimes hard work isn't rewarded. One of my early jobs when I was moving up at the ladder, I had this illusion. I was living under this delusion that if I just showed up, kept my head down, and produced good outcomes, that eventually when it was time to move up and when it was time to put in my application to take promotions internally, that people would just say, well, look at the body of work that he's done, and let's go ahead and reward him with a move up. And that wasn't the case. Because the top of the organization basically had this idea that if you were in your position for longer than 2 years, you were a lifer in that position. You were just happy with what you were doing. And your ability to move up the ladder was severely restricted. Now, they didn't share this with everybody. You had to actually have a direct line and conversation with the people at the top of the organization. And most people did not have that line. I was fortunate to hear this and say, okay, if I want to move up here, I have to demonstrate my ambition. I have to constantly remind people of where I want to be. And the climb, and this is the sad truth. For a lot of people, the climbing and positioning themselves replaces the output of work. It replaces the quality of work. And at some point, you reach an upper threshold where you have to decide what you want to be defined by. For me, I was working with kids and families. I wanted to be defined by impact of kids and families I worked with. And climbing the ladder at some point ended up becoming at the sacrifice of delivering quality services to the people I worked with. That ended up becoming a deal breaker for me. I'm like, I can't continue to try. I can't play the game of climbing the ladder at the expense of the quality of services I'm providing, where I am prioritizing the career ascension over me being present for my staff and for their families. I had to make that decision. And it limited my career for a long time because I would judge myself by how many people wanted to hire the staff I had underneath me, the staff I had developed. I was looking to create good hires for other departments and not great outcomes for myself and not advance myself. And I think the slap to reality kind of came back where I was on this work group. I got invited to this work group because I was like, this is like, 2000s, tens, the teens or whatnot. And a lot of cloud infrastructure was just being implemented in a corporate setting, and we needed a shared resource binder that was online. And so they kind of brought me in because they knew that I was the guy that was always working with digital notebooks and things along those lines, and put me on this work group. And we ended up working with IT and really, because the SharePoint server wasn't anything new, but they had a new SharePoint servers that they really weren't using, and they're moving away from the Linux-based servers for a lot of things. And so they wanted me to play around with the SharePoint server. So we did the SharePoint server, we did OneNote, and created an entire community resource binder in there. Okay. Now I had been on this work group for almost a year. The person that invited me on the work group, they took another position. And so I was the tenured person on this work group. And they replaced the person that brought me on this work group with somebody that was one of her hires. And this person, showed up to like a meeting or two. So this is where the game really got weird. And this was a reality check for me. Um, she positioned herself as the person that innovated this thing and came up with the idea. When I was the one that said, "Hey, we got this SharePoint server over here. We could just use OneNote and make it all happen." And my workers were the ones that were putting together the resources for this shared binder that was online. She positioned herself in a position where she was the guru to take the credit for the thing. And guess what happened? The person that actually came up with the idea, I ended up getting pushed to the side. Now, I did get a little bit of comeuppance because when we actually launched this thing, and had to introduce it to our staff, I sat up there and watched her fumble and trip over words and not know how to use this thing. And eventually ended up having to call me up to kind of help out. Now, hindsight being 2020, I just should have said no, but my workers need to know how to use this thing anyway. And so I went ahead and did it. But everybody kind of got a chance to see, hey, she didn't have anything to do with the establishment of this. And I told my supervisor straight up because I was pissed in the meeting. And I got feedback for that, matter of fact. But I was pissed in the meeting saying, you guys, I spent my blood, sweat, and tears on this thing, and you shoved me out the way and let her take credit for it. And the feedback I got was, well, it's not about who gets the credit and everything. It's about the team effort. Well, I mean, she used this as a resume filler to move up and leapfrog her way up in management. And I'm trapped here. So, yeah, it did matter. The credit did matter. And I was realizing like this entire idea, this narrative that you put your head down and work and grind. If you work hard enough for it, it will just happen for you. Specifically in a corporate space, that was bullshit. It didn't work like that at all. But that was it. That was the story that I was told. So take it how you will. But that was kind of one of my first one of my first dances with reality, and realizing that I had to kind of define what I wanted my career to look like, and I had to balance it with goal of progression, but not at the expense of the people around me. Some people don't do that. A lot of people don't do that. And that was my first experience with that. Because she was fine taking the credit. She knew damn well she didn't do any of that stuff, but she was fine with taking all the credit because she knew taking all the credit would elevate her to another position. And it worked out for her. So the idea that the government may be imperfect, but the system works, didn't labor under that delusion much at all as a kid, just based on where I grew up and my interactions with state and local officials as a kid in North Omaha, in one of the more segregated cities in the country. I did not have that delusion about systems and equity being built in and a feature of it. But now let's get into it. So, and this may be where I piss people off. This idea that America is a stabilizing force in the world. That's a tough one because we got all kinds of evidence that shows something to the contrary, and it's highly, highly contextual. We have kind of cornered the industry on destabilizing countries for our benefit or just for shits and giggles, like just because for the love of the game. And so a lot of countries that we've interacted with on a pretty consistent basis, they don't share that narrative. Um, and if we're being really honest, if you look at a lot of the revolutionary movements back in the day, you know, the American Indian movement and stuff like that, and the Black Panthers and all these other groups that marginalized people that were working collectively to try to gain rights. The American government had perfected a way to destabilize them. Um, and the COINTELPRO, like that's a real thing. They worked on counterintelligence stuff to destabilize these groups domestically, and then beta tested it on us so that they can roll it out to other countries in the world. So anytime we have potential competition, there's this rush to destabilize them or gain leverage in key parts of their economy, um, so that we can benefit. And so the idea that America is a stabilizing force, it really is highly contextual, depends on who you are talking to and about. That's the real. Our symbols mean something. We saw this kind of manifest with the Colin Kaepernick and the take a knee kind of thing, where a lot of people were really surprised that not a lot, that not everybody had the same level of reverence for the flag and the national anthem and all this other stuff. People were actually legitimately shocked by that, which wasn't surprising to me at all, considering where I grew up. And then the future will be better than the past. We're running into that right now, where outcomes for my generation are going to be worse than the generations that preceded us. And realistically, this idea that the future will be better than the past is not necessarily rooted, because the idea never really included marginalized groups in the first place. We were never in the consideration or in the conversation in the first place. And so you have to have the contextual balance of who is this specific message for. For some people, it's true, other people, it is not. And right now, we're seeing widespread growth where adult children are not living better than their parents, are actually doing worse. Um, and, with the same level of education, same kind of work histories, are seeing worse outcomes across the board. And a lot of that is a function of we've all decided that all of our money needs to go to a handful of billionaires, you know. Um, so the shared belief is breaking. All right. Symbols matter because they carry the story, human beings think in metaphors. Um, a room can be warm or a room could be warm, if that makes sense. A room could be warm physically, or it can have an emotional warmth to it. Same thing for cold. A room could be cold, or it can be cold physically or emotionally. Okay. And so we think in a lot of symbols, um, and ascribing meaning to symbols. Okay. They're not just decoration. National symbols aren't supposed to be just decoration. They tell what the country believes about itself. The flag, the Capitol, the Lincoln Memorial, the reflecting pool. These things are supposed to communicate uh, dignity and continuity and seriousness. But again, it depends on what population of people you're talking to, because depending on who you're talking to, that flag is either a sign of liberation or it can be a sign of oppression, depending on what end of what's the receiving end of this. You look at what all the contention about the conservative flag, and which is a weird thing, right? The arguments about the conservative flag is kind of a weird, uh, a really weird thing. Um, just because realistically, the beef about the conservative flag didn't really reemerge till the civil rights era, and a lot of segregationists were flying it. Like it wasn't really a thing uh, in that mainstream, in that part of the mainstream. It wasn't really a thing until civil rights era, and it ended up becoming the banner that segregationists waved. But now we've decided that some people have decided that this is my heritage and blah blah blah. Same thing goes to how we do the national anthem at sporting events. Um, yeah, it's been a piece of it, but this entire thing with the players being on the field and observing, that was kind of a post 9/11 thing. Like there are some leagues that did it, a lot didn't. I remember going to NFL games pre all of this stuff, and you didn't see the players until kickoff. Like nobody was like standing on the field observing the colors and all this other stuff. That was specifically just for the fans in the stands. And now post 9/11, a lot of stuff was going on, but that ended up becoming kind of the showpiece way to show that these players were about America, was having them on the field and showing people crying and all this other stuff during the national anthem. But it's still kind of a recent development, but we've kind of encoded it in our brain that it's always been like this. Okay. The reflecting pool is really interesting because that is an interesting piece of uh, self-generated drama that really didn't have to be this contentious thing, because the reflecting pool was fine. It was just there. It had been existing for however long it's existed, and never even thought about it. I've been to the reflecting pool. I've never thought about it that much. Never had occasion to think about it as much as I have over the last couple of days. And it's because we're going to make it better by ruining it. We're going to make the reflecting pool better by draining it, overpaying somebody to put all this paint down on it. Apparently the paint isn't resistant to, or they didn't let it sit long enough, or they tried to work too fast or whatever. Maybe one of these pool experts can kind of jump on here and tell us about the logistics of painting a swimming pool. But it raised the temperature of the water. We had algae, we had infestation, and then the other day I see a dead baby duck leading the news coverage because they dumped all that stuff in to kill all the algae and killed the wildlife that's in the reflecting pool. And so this thing that was just kind of this passive symbol of the capital and being in the capital of the nation in DC, it's become this really weird, contentious thing. People are getting arrested for picking up paint chips that are floating in the pool. And then they're trying to spin it like, well, they tore these chunks out. And you should see videos of like paint floating in the reflecting pool. But these are all symbols. And so it's supposed to communicate the national identity of this country. Well, what happens when the national identity of the country, specifically in the reflecting pool, is reflected as a slapshot, poorly put together, stagnant pond with algae growing on it? What does that say for the symbology? What does it say for the narrative, right? And so when these symbols look neglected or politicized or absurd, people notice it. Now, certain people are really super invested in it. I just take kind of this weird kind of like kind of gallows humor with it. Like, it is what it is. I've been to DC, man. This idea that DC has all this this high level and how it's the West Wing it's the West Wingification of American politics, really, where we're worried about the style and the style over the substance, and making this compelling statement and having the mic drop moment is more important than actual policy that impacts people's lives. Well, the president got a mic drop moment, man. So that's what matters. That's that West Wingification of American politics, which I really don't align with. I stopped watching that show, bro. I watched Newsroom for a while, and then that started getting on my nerves. That creator, what's that dude's name? Now I can't remember bro's name. He has that, kind of, the mic drop moment where the main character makes a compelling statement and then drops the mic, and everybody's left to, be in awe of it. And for me, I don't know, that Aaron Sorkin, the Sorkinification of American politics, where it's all about the mic drop moment as opposed to actual policies that improve people's lives in a measurable way. A lot of politicians on both sides of the aisles are chasing sound bites, and they know that the sound bites sometimes will translate into policy. Oftentimes it's just a level of grandstanding and getting control of the narrative. I hope you guys see where I'm going with this. It's about controlling the narrative. Okay. So we talked about the reflecting pool as one of the most important symbolic places for some people in this country. It sits between the Lincoln and Washington Monument. Okay, there is tied to civil rights, national mourning, protests, and presidential mythology. But now we're draining it a second time because peeling paint and the algae blooms and dead animals and all this other stuff are impacting how it looks. And people are really bent out of shape about it. Um, I'm looking at it like there's another couple $1,000,000 of my tax money, uh, of our tax money that never going to go to us anyway, that is getting dumped into this thing. Um, but it becomes easy to see why people treat it as this systematic dysfunction with all the stuff going on with it. Um, and it feel like it's endemic of kind of what we're all experiencing, the ongoing enshittification of American life. And really that concept, forgive my language, but the entire concept of enshittification is where you subscribe to it, software or some kind of product that requires regular updates from some kind of main server or whatnot, and it gets progressively worse and progressively more expensive to the point where the thing that why you bought it, the compelling reason you bought it, really no longer exists for, or is behind a paywall where you have to pay up for it. StreamYard's doing that to a lot of people right now. Evernote is another example. I used to use Evernote as my online note-taking app where I could write the notes in one place and get it no matter where I wanted to go. And they've just made it progressively worse and worse and worse and more expensive. And so I feel like that's what's happening collectively. Like for some people, and again, we got to understand that a lot of this stuff is hyper contextualized, right? It is super dependent on the context of which we're discussing this. It's not across the board where everybody feels the exact same way. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We do need a variety of ways that people perceive a specific thing, because that's how you keep from getting caught in this echo chamber. But um, there's a balance there. Okay. So I'm not going to talk about the reflecting pool anymore, but it's just kind of funny to me. When the country cannot maintain its own symbolic spaces without controversy, blame shifting, spectacle, people start reading that as evidence of something deeper. And this is what's getting a lot of people off the bench. For people that have been more or less satisfied with the way that the trajectory of the country are feeling fine, they're starting to question other aspects of the country. Like, are we stable? People are saying it's the collapse of the American system, or we're seeing the end of this, that, and the third. And like I said, for a lot of people, this idealized version of this country's never existed in any way, shape, or form, in any capacity whatsoever. But for some people, this is kind of a jarring thing. Okay. Here's an example about perspective. So back in my group home days, I'm working with one of my coworkers, and I'm just talking about growing up in North Omaha or whatnot, and a little bit of whatever gang stuff was going on that was kind of in the environment where I grew up, and my interaction with it. As this kid I wasn't involved in any of the street stuff, but it kind of impacted my life at specific points in some life and death situations. And he asked me, he's like, if you could get rid of all that stuff and live your life without it, he's like, would you? And I said, no. And he was confounded by, if I could get rid of all of this other stuff, the stuff, like some of the stuff that almost got me killed just by being outside, would I remove it? And I said, no, because it shaped me into the person I am today. Without these experiences with almost getting killed a couple of times, I would not have the instincts. I would not have the viewpoint or the vantage point that I currently enjoy right now. And he could not understand it because it was a perspective thing, because he grew up in the burbs, in the suburbs where none of this stuff happened. And all of this stuff wasn't even in his world. Like, it didn't even exist in his world. Not through the news or anything along those lines. Really, really super sheltered upbringing. Um, and for him, it was unthinkable that I wouldn't want to purge my history of all of these, things with street violence and ways it impacted my life. And my thing was, it shaped me into who I was today. Had I not experienced it, it would have altered my perspective on things and I wouldn't be the same person. And I'm kind of happy with who I am. But a lot of the narrative that we create about this country and our lives is highly contextualized. I cannot stress that enough. So the reflecting pool does matter because it's small enough to understand. People can look at it and say, if we can't handle this, what else are we failing to handle? And apparently a heck of a whole lot right now. let's be honest. But this is how narrative collapse works. People stop seeing the isolated failures and start seeing the patterns. Like you start interpreting the shapes within the fog. And you start determining, okay, where are we going with this? And they start seeing patterns, and the patterns become nothing works, nobody's accountable, everything's politicized, every explanation feels suspicious, and every institution does start to feel compromised. And I think that's kind of firmly where we're sitting, where you're seeing a lot of people completely and totally disaffected. And you see one end of it that is like, well, we could still right the ship, and another end is saying burn it all down. And I do feel like there is some kind of balance because one thing you got to understand, especially for the more firebrand kind of people that say, burn everything down, burn all the edifices down to the ground and start over. How many people are you willing to sacrifice in that process? And who's going to determine who doesn't make it? Because when you start with this, we're going to burn it all down kind of mentality, burn all the institutions to the ground. That sounds good on paper, but execution, that's always been really, really bloody and messy. And some people are squared with it. Other people, they don't even really know what they're saying. They're not willing to give up aspects that they've gotten accustomed to in their daily existence in wanting to burn it all down. They don't really even know what that means. It's just a combination of words that they're saying. It doesn't really have any meaning to it. Okay. Um, and so that's the balance. You have the people that want to try to find ways to maintain the house that's falling down around your ears, and the other people that want to burn it all down, but they don't want to be homeless for a while. They don't have any transition plan. They want to burn it all down. They want to burn the house down and have nowhere to move. And so I think that's kind of the polarization that you're seeing online. You're starting to see people get more and more radicalized, but um, the problem with it is it's unfocused and it's not solutions oriented. It's about how do we destroy the edifice that we're living under, but never have any escape plan or plan to take care of the people that are going to be impacted most negatively by destroying the systems. Because at the end of the day, as terrible as some of these systems are, as poorly as they function, some people still do depend on them to survive on a daily basis. And if you burn them down, what happens to those people? You know, it's kind of the inverse of what Vonnegut said, where everybody wants to build, but nobody wants to do maintenance. Or maybe it is not the inverse. Maybe it is the example. Everybody wants to build, nobody wants to do maintenance. You know, some people just want to upend everything without any kind of thought to who actually is the collateral damage in that, because they assume that they're not going to be the collateral. Everybody assumes that they're not going to be the collateral of their actions, and then, now I'm caught up in the thing that I created. People are finding that out on a wide scale with how voting works in this country. uh, because a lot of people who voted for what we are currently experiencing are on the receiving end of the majority of consequences of what they voted in, and they are confused as hell. Iran. Yeah, this is the one that's gonna. All right, so let's zoom out to geopolitical. Um, Iran still has Iran kind of disproves a lot of this idea, the narrative about America being the national and global stabilizer, because Iran is a living example of that, how untrue that history is. Okay. Recent reporting says the U.S. and Iran have been in talks for after months of war, but we're seeing how shaky this peace treaty is going to be, because we're already dealing with having to exchange threats, having to threaten to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. There's a very specific reason from a political standpoint. You haven't seen presidents invading Iran, and it has everything to do with the fact that the supply chain, the global oil supply chain, is situated in that strait. Um, and the country that has one of the longest contiguous borders with it is Iran. There's a reason why uh, a lot of American presidents have opted towards the diplomacy route. Um, some defaulted towards outright sabotage. We'll get into that in a second, but they opted towards the diplomacy route as opposed to the military force route, because that was the thing where they could say, okay, this is mutually assured destruction. We'll shut this whole thing down and we'll cut off money to everybody, all these Middle Eastern countries. We're going to cut off money to Saudi Arabia and all this other stuff because we can shut this whole thing down. There ain't nothing you can do to stop us. That's why a lot of American previous administrations steer clear of outright war with Iran. And I have my own theories, and I'm not going to share them on here about why we did it. But it's kind of endemic of kind of the mentality that we currently have, where it's like, break everything and we'll figure out a way to fix it later on. Okay. And so we got competing claims about nuclear inspections, sanction reliefs, and all that other stuff. And we got, the administration claiming that they agreed to nuclear inspections until affinity, while Iran is saying they denied any such agreement. It's just more conflict. Here's the thing. The history of Iran is the U.S. destabilizing Iran to suit our own needs and installing our own puppet dictators. That's why we're in this place where we are now with them, because we overturned their democratically elected government and replaced it with the Shah, who was a brutal, brutal, brutal dictator. And when the Iranian Revolution happened, a lot of that upper class was disposed. They ended up getting pushed out of the country because the Shah made sure that they stayed in power. Well, when the well dried up and the people overturned the government and installed the current system that they're in now, a lot of Iranians ended up having to relocate over here. But this is a perfect example of, well, American is a stabilizing force, and it's stabilizing force for whom? Because it wasn't for Iran, not for Cuba, definitely not for Haiti. All the interventions we've done on Haiti, my God. And a lot of Americans are completely oblivious to the fact of how much we've interfered with Haiti throughout the years, throughout the centuries. And it's always been the original sin of rebelling, having a successful slave revolt. That was the Haiti's original sin as far as America was concerned. And so they've been destabilizing Haiti left and right for a long, long, long time. And then turning around and blaming the Haitians for what they have after America completely destabilized them. Every time there was a ruler, every time there was a president that was elected democratically, America would go in and push him out. And same story with Iran. So the idea that America is a stabilizing force, stabilizing to whom? Because it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to other colonial powers, the UK up until recently, yeah. Now they probably don't think about it like that. They don't see America as a stabilizing force. But for other colonial powers like France and the UK and stuff, people that built their empires through subjugating other countries, America was a stabilizing force. They helped be the peacekeeper in their colonial projects. But now they see us as a wild card as well. All right. So for the public, though, for the American public, we're starting to see the doubt get cast across the board, where we're seeing unclear goals, competing claims. There's a lot of spin that's going on around what the economics and diplomatic outcomes are in Iran and things along those lines. And the economic consequences is the biggest thing. The way that you can get people riled up is you make the price of bread go up through the roof. That's the thing that is. It used to be apparently the third rail. That used to be the hot stove, but right now that doesn't seem to be the hot stove anymore. Oil and gas making it super expensive to exist. Like, we're seeing a tax on everything. When oil is the price of gas and oil is a tax on everything. Everything that you do, in this country is so tied to the oil industry. Everything you do is dictated by the price of oil, which is not necessarily the best way to live. But um, the price of oil is dictates so much of how we exist on a day-to-day basis in this country, and a lot of people are seeing it. But if you've been in the stock market or anything, you know that if the price of oil goes up, the price of everything goes up, and that's kind of why we're seeing this. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, and I got to wrap up here anyway. So we need to understand that there's a gap between strength and the confusion. And so war is one of the biggest tests of the national narrative. And for a long time in America, it was almost sacrilegious to question our war efforts domestically. And we started to see from World War II, we started to kind of see the decline in people thinking that this war, 100% just dropping everything and jumping behind the war effort. We saw, it was World War II, and then I think I'm thinking major conflicts, Korea, and then Vietnam, and then the Persian Gulf, and then all the other little tiny overthrow kind of wars that the U.S. participated in. They get increasingly, the response to them gets increasingly more negative. And we have an entire generation that from the time they were born until their adulthood, the U.S. has been at war with somebody. And that does things to a population of people because, their outcomes are determined by what happens in this war overseas. Okay. But there ends up becoming the gap, right? The official story usually wants clarity. Like, that's what our narrative bias wants. We want clarity, we want purpose, we want unity, moral justification. We want to feel like there's a moral reason why we are dropping heavy munitions on poor people. We want we want to feel like at least there's some moral reason there. And I mean, you saw how I framed that. So my thoughts on that are pretty clear. And we want to feel like there's some kind of strategic mind behind all of this. Like, even if we're seeing the ugly, how the sausage is being made, at least there's a goal to this. At least there is something. There's a why to this. Okay. But in recent times, the public experience of the United States going to war is confusion, skepticism, general fatigue and malaise about this entire thing, and distrust, and then the economic anxiety that comes along with it because gas prices are going to go through the roof. What is this going to cost us? So Market Watch reported that oil prices dropped after a 60-day pause in Iran. Oil sanctions tied to de-escalation talks. I'm reading, so forgive me, I'm actually reading my notes here. Pause on Iranian sanctions tied to de-escalation talks, while noting the conflict had disrupted supply expectations and pushed gas prices into the political conversation. Listen, it's going to be about 2 or 3 years before this, if this ever gets sorted out with oil prices. It's going to be a while. I just know I've been in the market long enough. It's going to be a while before this calms back down, because when you destabilize a supply chain, there's lagging things. There are things that don't happen for months afterwards. And that's why everybody's all pissed off about inflation and things like that when we came out of a pandemic that shut down the entire global economy for 18 months. People were shocked that we were having inflation, runaway inflation, because you had to keep printing money to keep the economy alive. We were in economic triage at that point. If you shut off the flow of money, when the economy slows down, it's almost like shutting off the supply of blood to a vital organ. And so you have to keep money circulating. And so what did they do here domestically? They turned on the money printers, had an economic stimulus package go out so that people could continue to spend money on things and buy things while they're all trapped in the house. And that's going to cause inflation. There's no way that that's not going to cause inflation. because the money supply grew. And so now there's more money floating around. That's why it was a perfect storm of all these people to do all these meme stocks and stuff like that, because they had this excess money. Well, they could just throw it into the stock market on these BS stocks. There's nothing else to do. Like, I don't think people understand there was entire days where there's nothing else to do. You couldn't really even go to work. In a lot of regards, unless you were a first responder. Everybody else was working remotely, and things along those lines, and you had more free time. So the times you would have been driving to and from work, you're at the house. Might as well play in the stock market. And that's what happened. And they had, people had these stimulus checks come down, and they had extra money. And so now people started playing around in the stock market and playing around in the crypto exchanges and things along those lines, because there was nothing else to do. And there's a level of nihilism there, because we didn't think we were going to make it out of this pandemic, bro. Like, we thought this was the end, and we still haven't really made it out. The pandemic is still going on. We just don't, socially, we just don't care. Like, that's the crazy part. Like, COVID's still going around. It's still killing people, still hospitalizing people. People are still coming down with these mysterious colds that don't respond to anything. But we don't care. We just said, yeah, we're not worried about this anymore. And that's kind of where we're at. So yeah, a lot of people got nihilistic about the outcomes of it, and they said, well, none of this stuff matters anyway. We not even might well not even make it. So let me go ahead and throw this money into this Bed Bath and Beyond stock and see what happens. Let me throw this money into this GameStop thing and see what happens. And that's what happened. So we're kind of dealing with the outcomes of this. And so the more the market goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it goes sideways, because of all the uncertainty going on in Iran. I'm about to wrap this up because I got to go pick up my son. Okay. The country says we're projecting strength through force. And the public feels like we're managing another crisis we don't fully understand the dynamics of. And I think, hindsight being 2020, I think if they knew that this entire Iran gambit was going to essentially shut down the world economy to a degree, I don't know if the same decisions would have been made in the heat of the moment, because it feels like this was a super impulsive decision, based on coming from somebody who's notorious about not having great impulse control. So that's where I'm at. Let me see how much I got more on my notes. Yeah, I'm about halfway through my show. So what I'm gonna do, y'all, I have to go pick up my kid from wrestling practice. So I'm gonna put a pin in this conversation, and we'll spin the block on this one a little bit later on. I may talk about it on my more Black Nerd Politics live stream tonight, which is Blurting While Dad. If you guys want to check that one out. If you follow me on here, typically it'll pop up on my Facebook and my YouTube. So if you're interested in continuing the conversation, I'll probably continue the conversation there. But right now, I got to take a run. I do appreciate y'all. This has been the Trial and Error Podcast. I'll talk to you later. Peace.